Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're opening up one of the most historically loaded, most spiritually charged, and most politically explosive places on the face of the earth. A site where 3,000 years of faith, war, and longing all rest on the same ancient stones. And where, in 2025, a rule that had stood for 58 years was finally broken. Let's dive into this. Section 1. The Holiest Ground. There is a place in Jerusalem, a raised limestone plateau in the heart of the Old City, that has stood at the center of human spiritual life for 3,000 years. For Jews, this is Mount Moriah, the place where, according to Scripture, Abraham brought his son Isaac, and where God provided a lamb in his place. It is here that Solomon built the first temple, sometime around the 10th century before Christ, a structure described as the dwelling place of God on earth, housing the Ark of the Covenant itself. That temple was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BCE. A second temple rose from the same ground, later expanded to breathtaking grandeur by King Herod. This was the temple that Jesus himself visited, the temple that stood at the heart of Jewish religious life for centuries. In the year 70 CE, the Roman general Titus destroyed it utterly. What remains today is the Western Wall, the last surviving retaining wall of that second temple complex. For nearly 2,000 years, it has been the holiest accessible site in Judaism. Jews have come to pray there from every corner of the earth. But the wall is not the mount. For Muslims, that same plateau carries an equally profound weight. Islamic tradition holds that from this very ground, the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven in the miraculous night journey, the Isra and Miraj. In the 7th century, the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque were built here. The site is known in Arabic as the Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary. It is the third holiest place in all of Islam, after Mecca and Medina. The same ground, sacred to two great ancient faiths, contested across centuries of history. Section 2. 1967 and the Status Quo. In June 1967, in the Six-Day War, Israel captured East Jerusalem from Jordan, including the Old City and the Temple Mount. For Jews around the world, this was an extraordinary moment. Paratroopers reached the Western Wall and wept. The photographs of those soldiers, arms around each other, standing before the ancient stones, became some of the most iconic images of the 20th century. But what happened next surprised many people. Then Defense Minister Moshe Dayan made a decision that was deeply controversial within Israel. He handed administrative control of the Temple Mount back to the Jordanian Waqf, the Islamic religious trust that had managed it before the war. Israel would provide security, but the day-to-day management of the site, who could worship there, how, and when, would remain in the hands of the Waqf. And crucially, as part of this arrangement, non-Muslim prayer on the Mount was prohibited. Jews could visit, they could walk the esplanade, but they could not pray, could not sing, could not engage in any form of religious activity that was visible. This became known as the status quo, and for 58 years, successive Israeli governments maintained it. Section 3. Decades of tension. The status quo, however, was never fully stable. Over the decades, the Temple Mount became a recurring flashpoint. Riots broke out repeatedly. Jewish nationalist groups pushed persistently for the right to pray there. And then, on October 7, 2023, Hamas named its massacre of Israeli civilians the Al-Aqsa flood, deliberately invoking the compound as a rallying cry for the Muslim world. The attack and the war that followed dramatically shifted Israeli public opinion. many Israelis began asking a question that had long simmered beneath the surface. Why, at the holiest site in Judaism, were Jews forbidden from praying? Enter Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israel's far-right national security minister. He had been visiting the Temple Mount repeatedly since taking office, pushing the boundaries of what was permitted and calling for full Jewish prayer rites at the site. Section 4. Tisha B'Av, August 2025. And then, on the 3rd of August 2025, something happened that no Israeli government minister had ever done before. It was Tisha B'Av, the most solemn fast day in the Jewish calendar, the day that commemorates the destruction of both the first and the second temple. Thousands of Jews had ascended the mount to observe the day. In full view of the cameras, in front of dozens of worshippers, Ben-Gvir stood on the Temple Mount and openly led the recitation of the Amida, the central prayer of Jewish liturgy, out loud, unmistakably, in deliberate violation of the status quo. It was the first time a serving government minister had openly prayed at the site. Reactions were immediate. Jordan condemned it. The Palestinian Authority accused Israel of desecration. Even Israel's chief rabbinate, which had long maintained that Jews should not ascend the mount for religious reasons, expressed opposition. Prime Minister Netanyahu issued a statement. Israel's policy to preserve the status quo on the Temple Mount has not changed and will not change. But the ground itself told a different story. Section 5. The shift accelerates. Because Ben-Gvir's prayer was not an isolated act, by early 2026, Israeli police, who fall under Ben-Gvir's ministry, had begun allowing limited Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount under certain conditions. In January 2026, prayer sheets were permitted to be brought to the site. By February 2026, the Jerusalem Post was describing what was happening as, quote, the most significant shift to the status quo since 1967. A reporter who visited the mount witnessed a group of Jews ascending the steps toward the Dome of the Rock, singing a Jewish hymn, escorted by police. Muslim worshippers watched. Some said it did not bother them. Others disagreed strongly, insisting this was Muslim holy ground and that Jews belong at the Western Wall below. The debate is fierce. The historical stakes are enormous, and the world is watching. Because what is unfolding at the Temple Mount is not simply a news story about policy or politics. It is a window into something far deeper, the ancient, unresolved question of who holds authority over the places where heaven and earth have met. 3,000 years of memory live in those stones. The prayers of pilgrims, the footsteps of prophets, the ashes of destroyed temples. And now, in real time, the rules governing those stones are shifting for the first time in nearly 6 decades. What happens next, no one can say with certainty. But this much is certain. The way humanity relates to its most sacred spaces, who may pray, who may enter, who holds the keys, is never merely a legal or political question. It is always, at its deepest level, a question of memory, of identity, and of what we owe to those who came before us. Thank you so much for learning with us today.